Ladies and gentlemen, let us now begin our afternoon session here with the title Empowering Innovation Through Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. It's my pleasure to invite once more our moderator, Mike Williams. Mike, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Now, this is the hardest session of the day because everybody's going to fall asleep after that huge lunch, I think. I will probably halfway through the session, but welcome. And today we're going to have a very important topic that's on the top of the agenda these days in all the media, newspapers, even to the highest level of politics, which we'll talk about today as well. And to actually try and even approach this topic, you really need somebody that's actually been heavily involved in this discussion, that's had a lot of experiences working with organisations across the board in addressing the issue of DEI. It shouldn't even be an issue. It should be something that comes natural. And today we're going to learn about it being a natural progression from an expert in the industry who you may or may not have seen before or heard before, not from our industry, but she's here to talk about how we can actually get DEI as an important consideration into the development of the business events industry and to make it more innovative. I welcome on board for a discussion Emeera Hashim, who's the Chief Impact Officer for IMPACTO, and she's the DEI lead for CEO Action Network, and I'll get Emeera to explain that as she comes and joins me on the stage. So please give a big welcome applause to Emeera as she joins me on the stage. And we might just turn these chairs around so we are actually talking to each other. This is going to be a casual conversation, hopefully. Emeera, just before we start, just tell me a bit about IMPACTO and who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you for the introduction. So IMPACTO, first of all, we are a sustainability advisory, homegrown in Malaysia. So the reason we were set up is we realized that for sustainability, we need to have a local approach. So we wanted to set up a consultancy that can essentially help Malaysian businesses integrate sustainability into their organization. So one aspect of sustainability, ESG, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, because you have that S component. So you did mention earlier that one of the other hats that I wear is the lead of the CEO Action Network's DEI workstream. So CEO Action Network is a coalition of CEOs coming together to drive sustainability in the corporate space in Malaysia. So there's about 66 members now. And it includes CEOs like from Petronas, Bursa Malaysia, CIMB, so major players coming in together with the same purpose. So for the
actually taking this issue seriously.
Exactly.
This topic.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so they were some of my members in the work stream that I was running. So together collectively we came up with a DI implementation guide for the Malaysian corporate sector. So it's the very first one in Malaysia because we wanted to ensure that there's that local context when we are incorporating DI, because everything else that we saw previously was developed in the West, in the global North. So their culture is different, their religious considerations are different, so we wanted to really localize it.
I applaud that because, again, coming from Western culture, we quite often come here and say, I was talking to you at lunchtime saying, my first consultancy business was to go into a country in Eastern Europe and tell them how to do business, and I had no idea how business was done in that country. So that was my first lesson in learning about accommodating and working with different cultures. So it's a very important, I'm glad you've done that. And I know in our industry we have a lot of industry standards are set in like America or Europe, and somehow they're meant to apply. There's a lot of talk this morning about accreditation and training and taking the standards that take place in America and placing them in here, but that's just not going to work, right?
We're a completely different market. We're an emerging market. We have different economic needs, social needs as well. So that's what we need to consider for sustainability and DI.
Yeah. Let's just introduce the topic of DI. I mean, there's a lot of mystery about what it actually really means, and quite a lot of people get it mixed up. They talk about diversity, equality and inclusiveness, but there's a big difference between equality and equity. equity. So what can you explain to me the difference and what does DI really mean?
Okay, so I'll break it down because I'll spend a bit more time explaining this because this is the fundamental.
Yes.
Based on my experience, there's still some confusion around this. So first of all, let's start off with diversity. So I'm sure you guys heard that diversity quota.
Actually, you better hold that first. Should we do the word cloud first?
Oh, yes, go
Because
ahead.
otherwise they might steal some words from you, right?
Yes, you're right.
We're going to start off, and I'm going to get you to introduce the word cloud.
Okay.
Okay, so what would you...
Yeah, so if you guys can all scan this QR code on the board, and then just answer 1 or 2 words. What word comes to mind when you think of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Yeah? So I want to see, are we all aligned in our understanding of what DI actually means, or are there some variances? Yeah? So we'll give it a couple minutes. Okay, so the first word that's popped up, fairness. Good.
Fairness, yeah, good word. That's that's a couple of people. What else does it mean? Come on, everybody.
Only one answer thus far. What do you think of when you see the word DEI?
Opportunity.
Good.
Openness.
Openness.
Equal.
Equal. Yep. Inclusivity, yeah.
Oh, equal is coming up strong.
Equal. Gender.
Opportunity.
Opportunity. So you can see there's some overlaps. Acceptance. Disability. So there's some of those dimensions of DI popping up.
Okay. Humanity. MBEW 2024, that's a good one. Value difference, embrace, yes. Yeah. There's really good words in there, right?
Yeah.
What's your initial interpretation of what they're saying? Is there a good understanding of what it means?
Yeah, actually, I would say that this room is doing better than perhaps some of the other rooms I may have been in before.
Congratulations, business events industry. You have a better understanding of DI. Can we go into it a bit more? Tell us about the difference between equality and equity and what does it really mean?
Yeah, so I want to start with D first, right? Because usually the D component, diversity, is the starting point for most companies. Because you hear about diversity quota, right? So diversity means the differences among people, like the differences between groups, right? That's it. So if you have a diverse company, it means you have different types of people, different types of groups of people in your organization. That's it, right? So the way diversity has been approached has been primarily as a ticking box approach. So there's an
tokenism.
Tokenism, exactly.
One of them, one of them, one of them.
Exactly. You're like, oh, okay, 30% women on board, I got that. So we're diverse, problem solved, right? But do you actually think that if you have 30% of women on board, women gender issues are resolved? No. So diversity is just one component, right? Having equal, fair representation of different groups within your organization. But once they're inside the company, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. So realizing that, the term diversity then evolved to D and I. So that came next. Diversity and inclusion. So inclusion means feeling a sense of belonging, like you're welcome there, regardless of your differences, right? So there's a famous quote, which is, diversity is like being as being invited to the dance. Inclusion is like being asked to dance. So you feel like you can participate fully because you feel welcomed in the environment. So that's inclusion. That's more like a culture thing. But still, that's not enough. So that's when the E comes into play. So you see there, I see equal there, right? But actually the DEI, the E aspect is actually equity instead of equality. So there is a difference. So equality means that everybody has the same opportunities. They're given the same opportunities. So ideally, that sounds like a good thing. But we need to realize that people have different needs, right? So we can't give everyone the same thing because it might work for one group, but it does not work for the other group. So that's when equity comes into play. That's when you actually provide the necessary support and structures to basically level the playing field, right? So everybody gets what they need as opposed to getting the same thing.
And that's often the challenge is actually, are you prepared to put the time resources into creating that equity, right?
Exactly.
And particularly when it relates to disability.
Yes, Exactly.
That's one of the hardest ones to accommodate in this diverse group.
Exactly,
Right?
because they're seen as a minority group. Why should we invest in structures to make it easier? But we'll talk about perhaps the reasons to do so later. But yeah, so the idea of DEI, it has to come all together.
Yep.
You can't just look at D or I or E in isolation.
But a lot of that exists now. There's a lot of D, right? I'm not sure there's a lot of E.
Yeah.
Are they all disproportionate in their application? Yeah.
So right now, the way that Malaysian companies have been approaching DI is, you're right, just primarily looking at D.
Yep.
And not just looking at diversity, but looking at one dimension of diversity, which is gender.
Yeah.
That tends to be the main focus.
Yeah.
So even our regulatory landscape, the programs, initiatives that's put out there is about gender, women empowerment, which is important, but it's not the only DI issue out there, right? We have, like you can see here, disability is an issue.
Oh, it's coming up a lot more too.
Yeah, you see it. Disability is an issue. We have things like age, older, younger employees, racial challenges. So in a multicultural country like Malaysia, race is a critical issue for organizations to address. So you need to have a really broad, holistic perspective of what the social challenges are and adopt that for DI. Not just saying, okay, I have enough women in my leadership, so I'm done, I don't have to do any more work.
One of the challenges too is when you make an effort to do DI and you say, okay, we're going to give women, say, more opportunity, then another group feels left out. And that's coming from a white male background. I mean, that is such a thing out there in the marketplace, that white males feel threatened because suddenly there's the rise of women and all this. So talk to me a bit about that. I mean, diversity is about having good representation of everybody, including white males, and addressing their issues too, right? So
I think this goes, talking about you as a white male, right?
Yeah.
Since you're here moderating this
Don't make me feel bad, though, or inferior, please.
Since you're here moderating, so it's good that you recognize your privilege as a white man, right? So these privilege, for those of you who are not aware, are sort of benefits that you might have without really earning it. It's something that you tend to get to be born with. Yeah. So it makes life a little bit easier for perhaps a white man compared to, say, an Indian woman. Yeah. Right?
Which I personally hate.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So then that goes to the other part, which is you here moderating this session, recognizing your privilege, then you're coming up as an ally, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what we need a lot more of. So DI issues shouldn't be driven just by the marginalized groups trying to close the gap. Yeah. We need everyone across the organization, including especially those in positions of privilege, to become allies and help close that gap, right? Yeah. So a lot of that's what's lacking right now. I think it's a lot of self-reflection and accountability, and also off-handing. Yeah. So then when, as the example that you gave in terms of the gender issues, as an example, when women come in, implementing empowerment programs for other women to kind of help close the gap for them, perhaps some of the men who haven't done self-reflecting work, who struggle in the workplace, might take it almost personally because they didn't understand the issue deeply, right? And not realizing that if a place is more inclusive for women, it will also be more inclusive for men, right? One pain point that I hear from men is, why are women talking about it but not men, right?
Men feel threatened by it too, right?
Yeah. So and there's this very interesting tidbit I find. So International Women's Day, right? It's March 8th, right? There's also an international...
2 days before my birthday, by the way.
My dad's birthday.
Oh, really?
But there is International Men's Day that not a lot of people are aware of.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And for International Men's Day, on Google, the most often the question comes on when is International Men's Day is on March 8th. So people are actually only Googling when is International Men's Day when it's International Women's Day, right? Yeah. So for me, I think there's that gap. You need to kind of ensure all groups are stepping up, right? And recognizing the problems. Because, for example, if women are able to go to work and there's more equality in terms of how they are addressing gender issues at the workplace, then men are also able to stay at home more, take care of the kids more, perhaps have more paternity leave, right? So gender issue is for both genders. It's not just women, right? Women get 1 month parental leave, men get 7 days. I don't think that's enough for new parents. I'm speaking from on behalf of men. So yeah, I think there's that mindset that people need to realize, which is DI benefits everybody. It's like the whole ecosystem benefits together. It's not an us versus them thing.
One of the unfortunate things about DI, it's been politicised a lot, and it's become a thing of, it's a derogatory term in many senses. And the best thing that highlights that recently is the US elections, the appointment of Kamala Harris, who has been captured as the DI hire. What do you say to that? I mean, in this day and age, it's kind of crazy, right? I
mean,
she's a very more qualified, not that I'm playing politics here, but she's more qualified than the opposition, who's got no political experience at all, really. So what do you say to that?
So movements, right? Just movements in general have always been weaponized, I think, in politics. There are certain groups that would benefit from division and, getting hatred to support them. So I think that's probably what's happening now. And you look at any movement, so even like climate change, for example, right? There's a huge backlash about climate action, right? And we're still seeing some of that now. So what I say to that is, listen to their concerns. Like I think to get DI done properly is not like ignore them and let's just do our own thing, because they're still part of the population. But I think really opening up that dialogue and understanding, okay, where are you coming from? What's the root cause of that frustration and that hate? Do you understand what we're trying to achieve? So really bring them into the conversation.
Malaysia, in my viewpoint, is in a very privileged position, because I remember when I was working with MySed many years ago, I was looking at what is one of the USPs, the key selling points of Malaysia. And to me, the biggest selling point of Malaysia was its diversity, ethnic diversity, and its ability to accommodate different religions and different languages and cuisines. And it's probably one of the best places in the world, I would say, to really put that as up front as a strength. Do you think Malaysia's doing that well, and what can they do to really, and not just based on ethnicity, ethnic origins, but what else can Malaysia do to push itself forward as a leader in this space? Because it's got the advantage.
I mean, we're coming from a position of strength because we're a peaceful country. We're actually consistently rated as one of the most peaceful countries on the Peace Index, the Global Peace Index. And we're also a diverse country. And that's not something that a lot of nations are able to claim, right? A peaceful, diverse nation. So I think we should really recognize that and try to build from that as a starting point, right? So I would say that across all levels, right? So regardless of where you stand within the ecosystem in Malaysia, so government has a key role, of course, in terms of driving inclusivity, racial harmony. So
you've got to start at the top, right?
Start at the top.
And at corporate level too.
Corporate level. So that's kind of what we're doing with CEO Action Network. And I also know the Bursa Malaysia, the stock exchange, is also trying to drive a lot of work in DI. But that's just coming from policy implementation, right? But DI is very much a human issue. So we have to ensure that there's a huge culture change as well. And it needs to cascade throughout. Right, so I don't want people to think that just because you don't come from "quote unquote" a position of power, then there's nothing that you can do for DI. It actually starts with everybody within your organization, even if you're an SME, what you can do. How are your hiring practices? How is your supply chain looking like? What products and services are you doing? Are you putting out there? Is it accessible to perhaps different disabilities? So it's touching across all different stakeholder groups. So yeah.
You mentioned during lunch that you were going to tell me a story about the role of leadership in the DEI story. Can you tell me what that story was about? And before we go, during the Q&A session, it doesn't have to be a Q&A session today. If you've got a story to tell where you've come across DEI, we'd love to hear from you at the last 10 minutes, or even if you want to put your hand up and share a story, you're welcome
Yeah, this
to.
is a small group, so you're welcome to interrupt us at any point and just yell out your question as well. We welcome
So
that.
just stick your hand up if you want to talk, and I'll see if I can see you. Okay.
Yeah, so for leaders, right, how they're adopting DI now is, as mentioned, they're setting targets, they're looking into policies, they're implementing, but without fully understanding what DI actually means. So it's seen as
and the benefit.
And the benefits of it. So it's seen as just like a metric, right? Something to do, as opposed to something that needs to be done, that's like a part and parcel of business, part and parcel of culture as well. So with leaders, the key role that they play is they set the tone, right? If your employees are all, suffering, that's coming from you, right? So you need to create that inclusive workspace. And that starts with self-reflecting. So I mean, regardless if you're a leader or not, but especially if you're coming from a position of leadership, you have to self-reflect, and then you have to actually be comfortable with uncomfortable truths, right? So are you guys familiar with the term unconscious bias? Can you put your hands up if you've heard about unconscious bias? Okay, just like one. So unconscious bias, so there's a lot of important terms that you need to understand when implementing DI. So one of them is unconscious bias, which means you might say, okay, for example, I'm not a racist. I know I'm not a racist because I think everyone should be treated equally, right? So you're not explicitly biased, but maybe for myself, because I have my own company, right? So if I'm hiring a team and I realize I'm consistently hiring Malay employees consistently, right? Because I'm like, oh, great, she's great, and I hire. And then realizing that I might have an unconscious bias.
And you kind of feel comfortable with your own set anyway. You've got a lot of commonality.
And you relate to them. So you have to kind of break from that. So what I find when people get called out for perhaps implicit discrimination, so unconscious bias, is defensiveness, right? Oh, no, I'm not racist. How can you say that? No, they're the best candidate, right? So I think that's one thing that's really missing from the business space, which is that self-reflection, the real personal work that leaders need to do. So like for myself, I have always been an advocate for inclusion, diversity since I was in my younger days.
Well, you were saying to me earlier that you've lived in different parts of the world, so you've had the experience being exposed to different cultures and lifestyles and things. So that's actually helped you, right?
And that's a privilege of mine to be able to experience that. So I always said, okay, like I'm not, someone with any issues of diversity or whatnot. And then I remember I posted something on my Instagram about like me getting really excited, and I put as a caption like me getting very jakun, right? JAKUN, jakun. So which my understanding was that just means someone who's like dorkily excited, just like very dorky excited. And then one of my friends actually called me out, and she's like orang asli, and she said, that's not a nice term to use, because jakun actually comes from orang asli, like in Peninsula, right? There's an indigenous group called jakun, and that term is used to kind of make fun of them for getting, like not understanding things, kind of thing. And I didn't know that, and that was a gap in my knowledge. And my immediate feeling was embarrassed. I shouldn't have known that. I'm an advocate. But then I'm like, no, there's gaps in everyone's knowledge. And immediately took it down and then did a bit of reading up on jakun to understand that a lot better. So I think that is what leaders as well as everybody needs to do to actually really adopt and drive DI.
Can I get into the issue of why? I mean, what are the real benefits of DI? How do companies, and if you give some examples of how you benefit from DI, I kind of have my own answer to that question, but how can it really
like what's the
create innovation? We've linked it to innovation.
Okay, so innovation, that's like a key thing. So there's actually multiple studies out there that shows a strong linkage between DI and business performance, right? A very popular one is from McKinsey & Co., where they showed, they actually did the math, and they showed that companies that are the most gender diverse perform 46% better than companies that are the least gender diverse. And not just gender, they also did it for ethnicity, and again, about like 36%. So there's clearly a link between DI, diversity, with business performance. And there's different reasons why this has been attributed to the improved performance.
Can you maybe touch on a couple of those? Yeah.
Yeah. So innovation would be the first one, right?
But how can you innovate from diversity? I mean,
So imagine this. Imagine you have. So let's say use Malaysia as an example. Okay. So we're really diverse, right?
Yeah.
So we've got a mix of racial ethnicities as an example, and then within your organization, you only hire Malays, for example, right? So people who will be coming in, the employees, for example, will be having the background, the experiences, the knowledge that comes with being Malay.
the culture.
Right?
Yep.
But that's just homogenous. That's just one group. So your company is only reflecting one group, but you're not actually reflecting your market needs, right? Which is diverse.
So if you've got a diverse client base, it's going to be very hard for you to cater for your diverse client.
Yes, and the skills that they bring as well. So you're looking at gender. I think we had this conversation at lunch earlier. So there are differences between women and men, right? We're not going to say, oh, they're exactly the same or all equal. No, there's innate differences in us. Men are...
We just gave the example, just on that, we gave the example that the criticism of Kamala Harris is that she's not going to be aggressive or strong enough to stand up against the Putins and the dictators of the world, that sort of thing. That was the criticism, because she's a woman. She can't do this, but explain to me.
So what you're saying is that the traditional male masculine qualities of competitiveness, right, assertiveness, that comes with being a man, and women are not able to do that, right? So that's a trait of traditional masculinity. And you think that for women to actually succeed in the workplace the way men do, then you have to have those traits as well, right? But I think the reason why...
Sometimes women try and take on the male traits, right?
Yeah, so the example I gave is...
They think that's how to be successful, is become a male.
Yeah, so you know, like the gender empowerment movement in the 80s, you have all the women wearing shoulder pads. Yeah. The reason why they were wearing those shoulder pads is to look like men, right? To basically have that strong, broad structure. But I would say the reason why gender diverse companies are performing better than non-gender diverse companies is because women come in with their own skill set, right? That men may not have, the traditional feminine traits, which includes stuff like communication, right? We're better at communicating. Empathy, right? Collaboration, teamwork, community. So I'm not saying one is better than the other.
Can I ask you, the one I keep hearing is more organised, better at organising things than men. Is that a trait or not?
Yes, of course. This is generalization, and
I know it's generalization.
But yes, I mean, as a perfect example that people like to bring up is you look at the countries that were run by women during COVID, compared to the one that were run by men. It was a lot more efficient. But again, there's not one better. So I'm not saying a company run primarily by women.
You need the mix.
You have to have that mix, because that's brings innovation, right? You have different kinds of experiences, background coming in to give ideas. So that's the innovation part. But there's a lot more reasons why diversity is linked to strong performance. You know, you also have better talent attraction and retention. If your employees are working in an environment that's inclusive, that's welcoming, that they feel that they belong and can share ideas, right? They're going to stay. You're going to attract the top talent to come join you, right? So and especially for millennials and Gen Z. So if you're looking into hiring those generations, and also you're able to enter new markets.
One of the groups that's really hard, that finds it probably the toughest of all, I would think, is the disabled, because to accommodate disabled, you've got to put the time and resources into making it easier for them to... Because, and I'll give you a good example of the conference industry, in that during COVID, we went to hybrid events, and there's a lot of talk about, okay, well, disabled people can now get easier access to conferences because they can watch it online. They don't have to turn up and have all the problems they have in accessibility. But that's not what they want. They actually want to be here, and they want to be part of a discussion group. They want to participate. So we haven't really solved the problem yet, have we?
No. Yeah. So as mentioned, there's so many dimensions of DI, right? And different approaches that's required. So it's not like a one size fits all approach for DI. You really have to understand what your stakeholders need, what are the challenges that they're facing, and listen. So in terms of what leaders could do is just real stakeholder engagement and taking in that feedback. right? Don't assume this is what they need, so we'll implement it. You have to have constant engagement.
It would make logical sense for a conference organiser or MySeb to be diverse because you're attracting these international conferences that are trying to appeal to a very diverse audience, and having somebody sitting within your organisation that has a better understanding of how to deal with the different attendees and catering for their needs, it just makes common sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, because something like a conference, you're trying to access a wide range of audiences.
And you can actually open up new audiences too.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So that's the other benefit of DI, the business case, is access to new markets. I'm seeing it from all corporate perspective, but yeah.
It still sits in the too hard basket though. It's still tokenism a little bit. I have one of them and one of them. How do we get the industry to onboard this whole thing? How hard is it? And you've talked a little bit about it starts at the top, but not always the top's going to make that move because sometimes this maybe goes into ageism, but it can be very generational. The younger generation seem to be much more receptive to the concept of DEI than the older generation that grew up, and they don't like change. So starting at the top sounds easy, and they've got to challenge themselves. But how does the industry move forward, and where does it start? You said from the top, but can it start from grassroots as well?
100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would say, I always akin DI to sustainability, right? DI is just a part of sustainability. So similar issues with sustainability, how can we get our leaders to start working on climate action? Those kind of questions that are coming up, right? And then what happened? The Greta Thunberg effect happened, right? And there was this mass climate protests happening over the world, and then that did cause a shift in the corporate landscape, right? So same thing with DI. So there's power in numbers, so the collective movement.
Yep.
You see that more overseas because you have things like the Black Lives Matter movement, you have the Me Too movement. Malaysia is not so strong in grassroots yet. I have participated in a couple of the gender movements here, but it's relatively smaller. But what I'm saying is find a collective, right? So even within your organization, so if you are an executive employee, you can find a group and start your own little employee resource group, right? With the same underrepresented challenges that you may face. And then you push the leadership. So there's power in numbers. Yeah.
Right. And how do you get and what about the leaders themselves? You were talking about the leaders themselves. Where do they need to start? I think you sort of touched on that before, and are they going to be motivated by grassroots, or is it something else that can drive them to?
Yeah.
If they're understanding they're losing business because they don't have good DAI procedures or policies, obviously but that's not evident. They don't know that until they lose it, right?
So I think that's the real.
It comes down to money sometimes, right?
I was going to say that's the real challenge, and again, similar to sustainability, one of the only reasons why businesses started acting is because it was impacting their
bottom
wallets.
line.
Yeah, their bottom line.
Yeah.
So DI can also impact your bottom line. If you have high employee turnover, right? You have to keep hiring your employees. That's really costly. And retraining them. That's really costly, right? If you can get reputational damage as well. I'm sure you guys have probably heard, I won't name names, but some organizations in Malaysia where it came out that there were a lot of sexual harassment happening in the organization.
Not unique to Malaysia at all.
Yeah, I know. Of course, it's global. It's a global issue. And then immediately you would you as an individual wouldn't want to join and work in that organization, right? So there's reputational damage there as well. So I think with leaders, unless they really understand it on a personal level, there needs to be external pressure, either from their employees, from their regulators, even financiers.
Yeah. And before we hear a few questions, we've got a couple of questions there which we want to get onto. Where do you start with DI if you want to? I mean, where do you go to find out about DI and how to create? I know you do a bit of that yourself. So are there trainings or you've said there's guidelines and things, but where do you start? Yeah.
So I'm biased, so I'll be start with what I put out there, please. So go to coactionnetwork.com and we have a DI guidebook there. And it's everything. It's a collective work from like 13 major organizations in Malaysia coming in together.
Right, yeah.
So it gives a local context. It talks about what DI means, and then it talks about how to actually implement and start.
Yep.
Right. And one key thing that I want to emphasize on in terms of DI is it looks different to different companies. It looks different depending on your geography, right? Depending on your sector as well. Like in oil and gas companies, DI work will look different than a tech company, for example. So what I would say is adopt it from I understand your maturity in DI, like where you are as an organization, how mature are you? And then adopt a phased approach to DI. Don't get overwhelmed by trying to do everything
Step
all
by
at
step.
once. Yeah, step by step. Then move up one. So we do put that into the guidebook, how you can actually do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hit some of the questions. Can we put the first question up on screen? What does great DI look like? That's a good question.
Okay, yeah, that is a good question. So it's quite abstract, and this my thought on this, but you would see it in the culture,
Yep.
right? Like if you step into the organization and you can feel that there's just different kinds of faces there, different kinds of ideas there, all smiling, all contributing their ideas. And when you come in yourself, regardless if you're coming in as an employee or a customer, you feel welcomed
Yep.
there.
Yep.
That's the output of a great DI strategy,
Yeah.
right? So from the organizational side, like how that's implemented, would be having strong policies and commitments in place. So
Yeah.
that ensures you institutionalize DI. Having strong culture, change, and capacity building programs. So
Yeah.
lots of training, discussions, dialogue. And the third one is having like specific metrics, indicators, targets to kind of track your progress on DI. So if you have those three-
satisfaction.
yes, yeah, employee engagement.
Is career advancement
Yeah.
easily available to everybody, that
Yes,
type of thing? Right?
exactly.
Okay, let's hit the next question. What steps can we take to identify and eliminate barriers to participate in innovative processes? That's another good question.
So this is an inclusion challenge,
Yeah.
right? So when you're talking about participation,
Yeah.
so if people are able to be in the room and fully participate,
Yep.
then it's inclusive. If not, then there's a real social or behavioral barrier
Yeah.
there. So there's different ways to kind of address this. A lot of it goes in terms of training, right, and having that dialogue, because oftentimes a lack of inclusion comes from a lack of awareness that's happening. So, for example, a white man could just be talking without realizing
Oh,
that
shut
he's
up.
not, no, without realizing that he's dominating the conversation,
Yeah.
right? So there needs to be, I think, two ways in terms of participation. So those with more influence, more privilege, needs to understand how to perhaps take a step back to be aware of their surrounding. And those who are from underrepresented groups need to be trained to feel empowered and build confidence and self-esteem to speak up and feel safe to speak up as well.
Yeah. I know there's an example, I've heard this story in America when after they do military drills where people's lives are at risk, they go into a debriefing room and the people, the generals, and you've got the head of command and you've got the corporals and everybody that's involved in that whole drill. They have to take off their pips, their titles, and everybody in that room can say anything about anything because it's life and death situation. So the corporal can tell the general, you gave the wrong instructions. That's kind of...
That's exactly it.
That's kind of it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So there's no hierarchy.
There's no hierarchy.
Everybody, yeah. So like, for example, when I did a DI event, the people are asking who are the VIPs
Yeah.
because there's going to be COs. I was like, no VIPs.
Yeah.
Everybody's the same.
Okay, let's look at the next question. I'm hoping we get through a few of these. Is DI relevant now more than ever in local context?
Yes, 100%. So in terms of the corporate space, because that's my expertise, Bursa Malaysia, for example, have been they are one of the contributors to the guidebook, by the way. They've released requirements for public listed companies to adopt various aspects of DI. So women on board, looking at age diversity, they're encouraging racial and disability as well. and then you have across different, so right now primarily it's at the bigger players,
Yeah.
right? But I've personally heard the CEO of Bursa saying, I'm putting it onto the bigger players and then it'll cascade down to the SMEs.
Great.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a ripple effect across. So if the bigger players are looking into DI within their policies, within their procurement, their product and services, that's going to extend to you guys.
I would say it's actually very relevant to our industry, to the Malaysian business events industry, because we are a global industry and we need to be able to understand our markets, our clients, and it would
the
be
different people that you guys cater to.
Yeah. Next question, please. Does anybody have a story they want to tell about any DI issues you've had in your own life or experience that you want to share? Anybody in the room? Okay, how can we ensure that DI efforts are not just performance but led to real sustainable change? Very good question.
That is.
Great questions.
Yeah, so this, I mean, again, this is like sustainability. How can we ensure it's not greenwashing, but it's real impactful change? So similar to what I've mentioned previously, it needs to come, tone from the top, right? It needs to come collectively at the bottom. And then also the culture change that I mentioned, right? So if it's performative, just means ticking boxes. Hey, look, we're doing things great, right? So there really needs to be culture change. So if you're having conversations, so I've actually had conversations in where I'm talking to the heads of sustainability, and they're like, we have no DEI issues, right? We have an annual survey put out there, and we score high. But then I actually did a focus group with their employees, and they say they do have issues, but they just they just score high in surveys because they can't be bothered because they don't.
Or they're afraid. Right?
Exactly, and they're afraid.
What am I going to?
And the only reason they told me is because it was anonymous.
Yeah.
I didn't know who they were.
Yeah.
So that's when you know that it's real, is when you can see the output. You can have those conversations, and you can have the dialogue with the different levels of leadership. Where you're, like you mentioned, I'm in the position of leadership. Let me know how you're feeling. My door is open. Yeah.
Okay. Have we got more questions? Is applying DI in an organisation realistic?
Yes, right? Of course it is, right? Or else you're just stomping on my work. But no, yes, it is. And I would say...
But it is something that people say, is that how hard it sounds sometimes too hard.
Yeah. It's a culture thing, right? So I would say...
And it's not just about ticking the boxes and having one of each. It's actually making sure you've got the people you need to do the job in place, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So,
and make it, and some may need a bit more assistance than others to have the same opportunities.
Yes.
And potentially, most likely going to contribute as much, if not more, to the rest of the conversation, right?
Yeah. So you have DI index, right, for organizations, and the ones that score highly also score highly in employee retention, employee engagement. So there's that link. I would say my organization is very DI aligned. Everyone's happy, and they'll always tell me how happy they are, and I don't think they're lying, and they stay. We've got zero. We're a small company, but zero dropout rate.
You've got no choice. That's your
exactly is my work.
That's your mission.
Yes, exactly. But everyone is there, and when I tell them about all the benefits, and my door, I don't have a door in my office. I can see like how welcomed they feel, and we're very, very productive. The performance, the engagement from them, the drive that they have from working in such a company, I can sense. So that benefits me from a business perspective.
Great. Any more questions? Oh, they keep coming. How can leaders hold themselves and their teams accountable for embedding DEI into their innovation strategies? That's a toughie.
That is a toughie. I mean, I think the challenge is holding leaders accountable for anything, right? I think that tends to be the challenge. But so I think one thing that I wanted to bring up as well is having sort of a transparent reporting line, right? Where people are able to give in their feedback and maybe reports on either explicit or implicit discrimination issues that they're facing. And having a system in place that actually investigates and acts on every single item, right? Including if it's reported against their leaders, right? So that holds them accountable. And the other thing is when holding people accountable, I don't believe in like public shaming or strong punishments. I often find that people care, right?
Yeah.
It's innate in humans to actually care about each other.
Yeah.
It's just what they've been exposed to and how they show that. So if, in terms of holding people accountable, you need to educate. So if there's been a misdemeanor in some way, instead of shaming and punishing, put everybody into the same room, have those difficult conversations together. And that, again, is a culture change where everyone needs to be okay with having those conversations.
Cool. We've got 27 for 23 seconds left, so we really haven't got time for any more questions. But Emeera, you're going to hang around for a little half an hour, so if everybody wants to come and ask you questions.
Yes,
Okay.
please feel free
so
to
please
pull
do.
me
But
aside,
I hope you got a really good insight into DI and why, especially our industry, it's very applicable, and how much more we could do with a really strong DI drive. But it needs a few champions in our industry to drive it. And as Emeera was saying, it starts from the leadership to get this up and running within our industry. We're not there yet, but then there's a long way to go. But there's obviously great benefit in it. And I thank you for sharing all your experience and giving us some advice to the audience today. And I'd like to give you a big round of applause for Emeera for coming to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks a
everyone.
lot. That's really good.
Thank you very much. Mike, Emeera, please remain on stage. Let's give them another warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. A very dynamic session right there. And I'd like to invite Ms. Tan Lei Teng to be on stage to present a memento for our speakers today. And Ms. Tan will be presenting a memento to our panel speaker, Emeera Hashim, the Chief Impact Officer of IMPACTO. And we'll be providing a symbolic memento for Mike, because Mike already received one, but for the benefit of taking a photograph with both of them, having a memento in hand here for the group photograph, so that it will look nice and complete. A great discussion there, empowering innovation through diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you so much to Emeera and also Mike.